Ludwig Wittgenstein, who lived from 1889 to 1951, is one of the most extraordinary philosophers in the Western tradition. He is unique in that within one lifetime he produced two major but largely opposing philosophies. His early work, contained in the Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus of 1921, attempted to show the logical structure of reality through language. His later work, Philosophical Investigations, abandoned that idea and treated language as something in which meaning is intrinsically tied to use. Here we will focus on the early Wittgenstein, whose thinking grew out of the work of Frege and Russell and the attempt to give mathematics and logic absolutely secure foundations. Until the late 19th century, logic still followed Aristotle's subject-predicate model. A statement such as "Barry wears glasses" was taken to have a subject, Barry, and a predicate, wears glasses, and was true if the property applied, and false if it did not. But such a form could not deal with relations such as "Barry is taller than Janet," where "is taller than" is not a property like colour or shape, but a relation between two objects. Frege and later Russell developed a new logic that could capture relational structure, but their projects ran into difficulty. Russell showed that Frege's system led to contradiction, what is now called Russell's paradox. If one considers the set of all sets that are not members of themselves, a contradiction follows. Russell tried to avoid this by ruling out such self-reference, but Wittgenstein later said that this merely tries to say what can only be shown. Against this background, Wittgenstein began his own project to explain the relationship between language, thought and reality, and to draw the boundary between sense and nonsense. In the preface to the Tractatus, Wittgenstein writes, "The book will draw a limit to thinking, or rather, not to thinking, but to the expression of thoughts." He means that the task of philosophy is not to add new knowledge, but to clarify what can be said meaningfully. Everything beyond that limit, metaphysics, ethics, even philosophy itself, falls into nonsense, though some of it, he says, can show itself in our experience. The world, he writes, is all that is the case. For Wittgenstein, the world is not composed of things, but of facts, combinations of objects arranged in particular ways. A fact is a state of affairs, such as the desk is in the room. Objects are simple and unanalysable. They are the ultimate constituents of reality. Different arrangements of these objects constitute different possible states of affairs. Facts determine what is the case and, by contrast, what is not the case. Unrealised possibilities belong to logical space, although they are not actual. The desk is in the car park is logically possible, but not always the case. The desk is inside the board pen is not even logically possible, since those objects cannot be combined in that way. The Tractatus distinguishes two kinds of nonsense. The first is straightforward, as in the desk is inside the board pen, where a combination of objects is physically impossible. The second kind concerns what cannot be said, but only shown. Nonsense that arises when language attempts to state the limits of logic or meaning itself. Every name, Wittgenstein says, stands for an object. The object is its meaning. Elementary propositions are built from names and describe the simplest possible states of affairs. More complex propositions describe facts involving relations. If the world had no simple objects, but only complexes, understanding would collapse into an infinite regress of explanation. Elementary propositions are logically independent. The truth of one does not entail the truth of another, and this logical independence defines the structure of reality. Wittgenstein distinguishes logical from empirical propositions. Logical propositions, such as "if Adrian lectures, then Adrian lectures," are necessarily true by virtue of their form. Because their truth is independent of how things are, they tell us nothing about the world. They are tautologies, true but empty. Empirical propositions, such as Adrian lectures, can be true or false depending on the facts. A meaningful proposition must therefore be bipolar. It must be possible for it to be true or false. The price of guaranteed truth is emptiness. The price of meaning is the possibility of error. To explain how propositions represent reality, Wittgenstein introduces the picture theory of meaning. He was struck by a court case in which a model of a car accident was used to represent the positions of the vehicles. A proposition, he thought, works in the same way. It is a picture of reality. Each word corresponds to an object, and the way words are arranged mirrors how objects can be arranged. If the structure of the proposition matches the structure of a possible situation, it pictures that situation. When the situation obtains, the proposition is true. When it does not, it is false. A logical picture of facts, he writes, is a thought. The proposition and the thought share the same logical form. Logical form is what any meaningful proposition must have in common with the reality it represents, but logical form itself cannot be stated. It can only show itself. Hence, propositions about logic, mathematics, or ethics are, in the Tractarian sense, nonsense. They cannot be true or false, for they describe no possible state of affairs. Russell's theory of types, Wittgenstein claimed, was an attempt to say what logic already shows. What can be shown, the underlying form of the world, cannot be said. From these ideas, Wittgenstein drew a distinctive form of solipsism. He agreed with neither Descartes nor Berkeley that only the mind exists. Instead, he argued that the limits of language are also the limits of the world. He writes, "The limits of my language mean the limits of my world." We can only name what can be experienced. Objects beyond experience cannot be part of our world and cannot be spoken of. The subject, the I, is not an object within the world, but its limit. The subject does not belong to the world, but is a limit of the world. You do not see your own I in your visual field, and in the same way, you do not encounter the self as an object. When the subject ceases, the world ceases. At death, the world comes to an end. The self shows itself in experience, but cannot be described within it. Because ethics concerns value, and value is not a property of objects or events, ethical statements cannot picture facts. It is clear, he writes, that ethics cannot be put into words. Value, like the subject, lies outside the world of facts. Ethics and aesthetics are therefore transcendental. They show themselves in our experience of the world, but cannot be stated within it. The sense of the world must lie outside the world. A good or bad will changes not the facts, but the limits of the world. The world of the happy person is different from that of the unhappy one. This leads to a striking paradox. If meaningful language must describe possible facts, then the propositions of the Tractatus itself about logic, language, and value cannot, by its own criteria, be meaningful. Wittgenstein recognizes this, writing that his propositions are like steps on a ladder. Once one has climbed up them, one must throw the ladder away. The book ends with the sentence, "What we cannot speak about, we must pass over in silence." After the Tractatus, Wittgenstein believed he had resolved all philosophical problems, but by the late 1920s he began to reconsider. Discussions with the mathematician Frank Ramsey convinced him that some of the impossibilities he had called logical, such as two colours cannot be in the same place at the same time, were really physical impossibilities. The economist Piero Sraffa also challenged him, once making a simple hand gesture and asking what its logical form was. Wittgenstein realised that meaning could not rest on a single fixed logical structure. It depended on use within human practices. This insight marks the beginning of his later philosophy. It also shows that the early and later Wittgenstein though different, are not wholly opposed. Both aim to clarify how language relates to the world we inhabit. Wittgenstein's early work is not a complete theory of language, but one account of how it can function. In his early period, he tried to set out the logical form of reality and to show that language and the world share the same structure. He saw the task of philosophy as defining the limits of meaningful speech and exposing what lies beyond those limits. Later, he came to think that meaning arises not from abstract logic, but from the uses of language within human life. Even so, the Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus remains one of the most ambitious and exacting attempts ever made to show that logic, thought, and language mirror the world. It is also an extraordinary example of an intense investigation of logic leading to what might be called an informed mysticism. That mysticism, far from being abandoned in philosophical investigations, remains present, though largely unspoken, since little can be said about it beyond the human practices and beliefs to which it gives rise.